Hi, in this video, I'm going to introduce you to manipulating 2D arrays using Python list. So just so that we are on the same page, we know that Python has no built-in support for array, so we will be using Python list to kind of emulate an array. But we'll continue to use the term array, despite the fact that we will be using list just because we're going to be using list like array in other languages. Now, just want to say this, that actually Python does have support for array in its standard package that comes with Python itself. It's actually just called array if we import it. So it's not built into the language itself, but you can import it. But it's not very widely used, and it really is not. It's quite limited actually in terms of its functionalities. So it's not necessary for us to that we use this for our study, so we'll just stay with list. So we had a brief preview of this, that we in Python to write a 2D array, we're going to use a outer list of inner lists, right? So first pair of bracket here, that just signifies it's a single list, right? And each element of this outer list is yet another list signified by another pair of square brackets. So I've kind of typed it out here. And if we print this A here, that we see is a list of lists, right? Now, next, there are going to be times that we don't want the entire 2D array, but we want a particular row of the 2D array, right? So if you look at it as a list, especially look at outer list, the first element of this is at index 0. And index 0, that gives us a row, right? The first row. So if we just print that out, that's the first row, 1, 2, 3. And then if we print the second row, that's 1, 2, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so one element of the outer list is a row. Now, furthermore, what if we get down to even smaller units, like, for example, a particular element of the 2D array? So we know we can get to the first row, which is element 0 of the outer list, by using A0, right? And that gives us 1, 2, 3. Now, then to get to, let's say, the first element in the first row, then this is the first row, and then first element, it would be, at the 0, or the element at the index 0. So that gives us a 1. And then let's say another example is, okay, what about the last element is the second row. So we know in order to get to the second row, that's 1, right? That gives us a second row. And then the last element will be the index 2. So 1 and 2. So that gives us a 6. So, well, in general, that you can see, if we want to get to a row, then we would just say, the name of the 2D array, and then the row index. And then if we get to a row and then a column, an element at a row and a column, then we start with, again, the 2D array itself, and then we say the row and then the column index. So now I would like you to give this a try yourself. I have another 2D array here. It's not a square array, it's a rectangular one. So, and I circle a few of these numbers here. So what are the row index and what are column index for each of these circled elements? All right, so assuming you've done that, here are my answers, and please verify them against yours. We oftentimes don't just want to access a single row or single element. Right? Usually, in a lot of use cases, we want to get to a few rows or a few elements, or all of the rows, all of the elements. So how do we do that? Well, we'll do that with a loop, right? Now, in case of a 1D array, let's say if we want to go through each of the elements in 1D array, we just do a for each of the elements in the list or array, and we can do whatever we want with that particular element, right? So very similarly, if for a 2D array here, so if we want to get to each of the rows, we can just say for the row in A, and remember A is the outer list, right? So each the name row then in each pass of the loop will be assigned one of the inner arrays, right? So 3 in this case. So if we run this, and if all we want to do is print out, I'm going to print out a row, not A, and there's that. So this is iterated through the outer loop 3 times, and each time we print out one of the inner array or list. And that's what the slide shows. Now we have each row in row here, right? So what if the next thing we want to do is to actually go through each element of each row, which happens a lot, right? We just want to go through them in a systematic way, each of the elements. So then because each row is just a list or a 1D array, all we have to do is we then for each of the elements in the row, we can just print them out. And in this case, when I print these each row, I'm just going to separate them by space. And once I print out one row, I am going to do another print so that I have a new line. So let's see what this looks like. And I should get rid of this. I'm sorry. And there's that. So that is, I'm printing out each of the elements one by one. Now, just to make sure that you understand what this is for and what this is for, I would like you to do a little exercise, and that is the first thing is remove this print and see what happens. Second thing is if we change the end from a space to something else like a dash, see what happens. Okay, and finally, if you completely removed this end argument altogether, what happens? So please pause the video and give it a try. Now, so far we talked about how to read a row or read a element or multiple elements in a 2D array. Oftentimes we don't just want to read, we want to also write to it. So how can we change an element in the 2D array? For example, if we just want to add 1, increment all the elements by 1, does that work? If we just do a e and e plus equal to 1, does that work? So let's change this quickly and see e plus equal to 1, and then we'll print out the entire a here. Well, is it changed? No. And I hope this is not a surprise, because even if it's just a one-dimensional list or array, we cannot change the element inside that array using this way, because in the for loop, when we are looping through an element in the array, this element itself, this is just a reference or a copy of the element. It's not the element itself. So we cannot change any element by just using a for loop like this. So how can we change it? So remember, if it's just a list or a 1D array, in order to change each of the elements, we have to do something like this, that we have to go use the index, like go through from 0 to the length of the list, and then we use the index to index into the list and then change it. So if we do this, then yes, we can change each element of the list. So by the same token, for a 2D array, we would have to also use an index, right? So we'll index into the row and then the column to change its value. Now, before we do that though, let's see how we actually iterate over the 2D array using the index, but just to print out each element. So this is how we're going to do it. And for this example, I'm going to be using a non-square array. And now, so we're going to use the same nested loop as before. And for the outer loop, we're going to loop through the outer array. Now, each element of the outer array is a row, right? So the number of rows in the outer array is basically the length of A. So the row index I'm going to be used is going to be in the range of length of A, right? And then next thing is, so we're gonna, once we are in a row, we're gonna iterate through the columns, right? So the columns, for each of the columns, so that's given by A, the row index here. Now, for each of the columns, the number of elements is basically the length of that row, right? And so for the column index itself, it's going to loop from 0 to the range of that. So that's how the row index and the column index is going to iterate. So just kind of very quickly, um, what what is the row index going to loop through, and how what's the number is going to go through, and the same thing for column index, what is it? So hopefully you see this. Basically, number of rows here is 3, right? And the number of columns for each of the rows is 4. It's a rectangular array, and so that's just that. And let me just, I already typed it out here, and let me quickly run through it, and you kind of see what you expect to see, hopefully. So with that, I'm actually going to ask you to please try to increment each element in the 2D array by 1. So assuming you've done that, here is how I would do it. Basically access the element at row index and column index and just increment it by 1. And let me run this, and there it is. The original 2D array starts at 1, ends at 12, and here it starts at 2 and ends at 13. And I also like to point out that writing it this way, writing the nested loop this way, that for each row, we are going to check the length of that row and go through all the columns, means this same loop would actually work for ragged 2D array. So if I add another, say, 2 numbers here, it will just work. It doesn't break a sweat. So one more exercise, and this could be a little more interesting, and that is, let's write a function called getColumns, and it takes 2 parameters. One is a 2D array, another one is a column index, and it will return a list or an array, 1D list of all the elements in that column. Right? So pause the video and please give this a try. Okay, so there are several ways to do it. Could go through a couple of them. So first one is basically we can start with the empty column, right? And we'll just iterate through each row in the array, and from that row we basically just retrieve that column, the element at that column, and just append it to the column list, and we return it. So in this case, I am getting the column 2 of A, so that should give me 3, 7, and 11. And that's 3, 7, and 11. So that's one way. And another way would be kind of very similar idea, but instead of using just the row itself, we could use an index. So, and to use an index, we basically say, in the range, that's from 0 to the length of the 2D array, which again give me the number of rows. So, and we'll access the element by the row index and then the column index, which is the argument. So that's that. And oopsie, I print it out. So it should give me exactly the same answer here. And I will explain the final way very quickly. The final way is really the same as the first way, but it's using list comprehension here. So we're going through all the rows in the 2D array, and we are just accessing the column in that row and make a list out of all these elements from each row at that column index. So it's just taking advantage again of Python's list comprehension.